Hi everyone! In today's lecture, we'll learn about puff sleeve design 3, a style where puff gathers are present both at the cap line and the hemline. We'll start in a similar way to how we approached design 1. First, you'll need to trace the sleeve basic block. To do this, begin by drawing a horizontal guideline to align the bicep level and a vertical guideline down the center of your dot paper. Use the dot grid on the paper to ensure the lines are perfectly perpendicular as you draft. Next, align the bicep level line of the basic block with the horizontal guideline you just drew. For the center guideline, place the block so that the midpoint of the bicep line, not the notch, matches your vertical guideline. Once everything is aligned, begin tracing. Remember, you only need 2 inches of the side seam, so mark that first before you start tracing. Don't forget to trace the armhole notches. The back armhole has double notches, while the front armhole has a single notch. Remove the block and draw a line connecting the 2-inch marks on both sides at the bottom. Next, position your grid ruler at the armhole notch, which is 3 inches from the side seam, and draw a straight line down to the hemline. Ensure your grid ruler is perfectly perpendicular to the hemline for accuracy, and then draw a straight line back up to the armhole notch. Now, starting from the center, measure 2 inches out on both sides and mark those points. Then draw a straight up from each mark to the cap on both sides. To make it easier to see on the screen, I've highlighted each piece that will be cut, but you don't need to do that. However, this part is important. Now let's label each piece to avoid confusion after cutting. Once everything is labeled, you're ready to cut the pieces using paper scissors. Once you've cut all the pieces, we'll move on to drafting by attaching them to a new piece of paper. From this point forward, the process will be very different from design 1, so pay close attention. First, prepare a new sheet of pattern paper that is 25 x 18 inches in size. Draw a horizontal guideline about 7 inches up from the bottom edge of the paper. Then draw a vertical guideline down the center of the paper. Since this design has puff gathers at both the cap and hem, we'll attach the pieces parallel to the center guideline. Let's start with the 2 center pieces, B3 and F1. First, make a mark 1 inch away from the center on the horizontal guideline. Then attach the pieces so that the bicep line on the pieces aligns with the horizontal guideline on your new dot paper. This ensures the pieces are spaced evenly and remain perfectly parallel as you attach them. We'll attach the remaining pieces the same way, spacing them 1 inch apart. First, make a mark on the horizontal guideline, then attach the piece at that spot. To keep things simple, I'll give you specific measurements and steps during this lecture. But remember, the fullness of the puff sleeve can be adjusted. It can be more or less full than what we're creating today. So far, we've added the desired amount of puff fullness to the basic sleeve. Now, in order to create the gathering and achieve the puff effect, we need to provide space for the volume. This means we'll need to extend the cap height, which will naturally increase the armhole. Let's work on that from now. We'll keep the original shape of the outermost pieces, B1 and F3, exactly as they are. Make sure to keep this in mind as we move forward. First, use a French curve to match the angle of the armhole curve on B1. Extend that curve smoothly to create a continuous line. Next, move to the center guideline. From there, locate the highest points of the 2 center pieces. Measure 2 inches upward and mark the spot at the center. Starting from that mark, draw a horizontal line that extends 1 inch to each side. ensuring it's perfectly perpendicular. Now, use the French curve to find the best angle to smoothly connect the line to the curve you drew earlier for B1. You can start at the 1-inch extended point or a little closer if it makes the curve look more natural. The important thing is not to focus too much on keeping exactly 1 inch. Instead, make sure to add a bit of horizontal width at the cap height to achieve the puff shape. The rest of the armhole curve might come together on the first try, but it's completely fine. If you need to adjust it afterward, just focus on making the curve smooth and natural. Take your time and ensure it looks just right. It looks like the pencil lines are a bit hard to see, so I'll go over them with a marker to finish the final drafting line. Watch carefully to see which part of the French curve ruler I'm using and how I'm positioning it. Make sure you keep drafting with your pencil. Don't switch to a marker. Now that we've finished the cap section, let's move on to the hem part where we'll create the puff gathering. Just like with the cap, we need to add space for the puff volume. For this, we're going to extend 2 inches. Here's how to do it. First, connect the bottom edges of the 2 center pieces with a straight line. From that line, measure 2 inches down along the center guideline and make a mark. Then, from that mark, draw a horizontal line extending 1 inch to each side. Make sure it's perfectly straight and perpendicular to the center line. Take your time with this step to make sure everything lines up properly. Now it's time to draw the curve. First, please mark 1 inch from each end of the bottom edge of the pieces. These marks will serve as our reference points for merging the curves. It's important to have these reference points because, without them, the angles of the curves on both sides might end up looking very different. So we need these guidelines to keep everything consistent. Does that make sense? Now let's start drawing the curve from the 1-inch mark we just made. As you can see, I'm using the French curve ruler and drafting towards the center's horizontal line. The end of my ruler doesn't need to directly touch the destination, but it should point towards the horizontal guideline I drew at the center. At the same time, make sure the curve at the left end starts smoothly from the 1-inch mark. Adjust your ruler carefully to make sure the curve flows smoothly from that point. Take your time to get the right positioning. Now, flip the French curve ruler and use it to smoothly connect to the line I just drew, starting from the center's horizontal line. As always, if you place the grid ruler underneath, it will help prevent the mistake of having the curve drop below the horizontal line. This keeps the curve aligned properly. Once you've finished drawing the curve, step back and check if both sides are balanced. If needed, feel free to make adjustments to the volume. The first 1 inch and the 1-inch horizontal line at the center should remain as is, but the rest can be adjusted according to your design preferences. It's okay if both sides aren't exactly the same, as long as the overall balance looks right. I want to emphasize again that I'm using a marker to highlight my final drafting line for demonstration purposes, so it's easier to see on the screen. However, you should always use a pencil when drafting, as this will allow you to make adjustments more easily as you work. Now, please add a 1/2-inch seam allowance around the entire perimeter. Now, what's the last step? That's right. It's time to mark the notches. Start by marking the center top and bottom notches. Then mark the armhole notch 3 inches from the side seam. For the back side, since it has a double notch, mark 3 inches, then go another 1/2 inch and mark again. For the front side armhole, just mark a single notch 3 inches from the side seam. Next, we need to add the gather control notches at the hem. These should be marked at the bottom of the end pieces. Why do we need gather control? Well, if there's puff under the arm, it could be uncomfortable when your arm is down. So we focus the puff volume away from the underarm to make sure it's comfortable. Once you've marked the notches, the final step is to add the pattern information. Don't forget to also mark the grain line.